Let's bring back in my good friend and co-host, Jeff Small. And we also want to bring in another very good friend and our next guest, Matthew Johnson, owner and president of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income store located in Humboldt, Iowa. Whew. We got a lot of uncertainty going on there with the stock market, Matthew, right? We got the elections, we got isolationist policies with China, we've got this whole COVID-19 uncertainty. What are you seeing right now are the biggest factors that people in Iowa are concerned about when it comes to the stock market?
When it comes to the stock market, I think that there's still a lot of individuals that are kind of holding their breath. As long as all the stars are aligned and the feds keep everything in place, they're probably okay. But for the most part, I think that there's also a tremendous amount of limit orders out there with people on the trigger, and they're ready to sell if they see volatility or if they see things go the wrong direction.
Jeff?
You know, MJ, we hear a lot from folks, since you're an income specialist, we hear a lot from folks that we visit with for the first time. I've got this common stock. I know it's not doing that great, but hey, it pays a great dividend. And don't you find that people in general don't understand dividends in all senses of dividends, the ones that we create in the safe or more conservative realm of financial advising versus the ones that are maybe more aggressive in common stocks? What type of misunderstandings in dividends do you see up there in Iowa?
I do see a fair bit of that. I see that there's a lot of people that, number one, they'll own some individual stocks. They're the common stocks, they're paying the dividends, and they're not paying attention to the yields. Many of the investors don't even realize that their dividends have been cut to some degree. Some have been eliminated altogether. You look at many of the big large cap corporations, they've got net revenue that's, negative 25, negative 30, negative 40%. And common stock investors typically don't understand that dividend is not guaranteed. Also, another area that I see that is often misunderstood is the fact that they've got mutual funds, and they might see that they're getting a yield of a dividend, but they don't realize that the dividend isn't actually being paid to them. It's being reinvested back into buying more shares of the mutual fund. And that really has a negative consequence, because when you need the income from a mutual fund, what do you have to do at that point? You have to sell the shares to get the income.
Yeah, most people don't know the difference. I hate to say it, but you ask them what the dividend is, I'm getting $2,000 a month. I think that's a dividend, when really, as you say, that is the withdrawal. So I know that Iowa is a red state. We have a lot of viewers right here on Newsmax from Iowa. So in the minute we have left, how concerned are they? This concept of having a limit order, one finger on the trigger, you think a lot of that's because they're concerned about maybe a blue wave?
I think it could be a little bit of that, but I think that there's a bigger component here. There's a lot of people that are watching what the Federal Reserve is doing, Dave, and they're printing money like a bunch of drunken sailors right now. And people are so afraid of inflation. People in this area, they're rural farmers. They were trying to buy and own ground with mortgages that had 14, 15 plus % interest rates on them. And so they're looking at the common stock. And even though in some form of their mind, they say, well, the stock market is a good inflation hedge. They know that if the volatility strikes all of a sudden because the feds decide to do something different or the election goes the wrong direction, now they've lost whatever growth they had against that inflation hedge, and that's a concern to them.
So not a lot of modern monetary theorists in Iowa is what I'm hearing you say. We take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in a minute with more to come from Matthew Johnson. I'm David Scranton, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, here with my co-host Jeff Small, and our good friend and guest, Matthew Johnson, owner and president of Johnson Wealth and Income Management, a retirement income store located in Iowa. So, what's your crystal ball tell you, Matthew? We get out a year, maybe a year and a half, and we're past the COVID-19 crisis, perhaps herd immunity, vaccine, whatever gets us there. How do you think the economy and the financial markets will have changed?
Well, that's a good question. I wish I knew the exact answer to that. But right now, there's a lot of, I would say, mindset that is very dismissive over so many different things. People are so sick of COVID-19, the topic of it, the talk about it. They're so disenchanted with the elections right now. There is kind of this dismissive mindset where they're just going to continue to go back to the old ways of doing things. And yet I see that there's this undercurrent of being very, very guarded because they understand that there's so many things that are beyond their control. And they know that they can control their money, they can control where their money is invested. I would say as long as the Federal Reserve continues to stick to their guns in monetary easing, that things will be somewhat steady. But I honestly do not see a tremendous amount of growth like so many analysts are suggesting we're going to have, because there is a lot of recovery that is having to be recaptured from all the losses. This was the greatest contraction we have ever seen economically in the last, 75, 80 years. It's pretty profound.
And the quickest, too. The greatest and the quickest. Isn't that right, Jeff?
Really is. And so now we're on the topic of the greatest things, and this has been a crazy year, greatest correction, shortest correction in history, fastest recovery. Half the employees that we've lost are back to work, but now the economy's facing headwinds. So what opportunities should investors and pre-retirees in, let's say, the 55 plus space be concerned about right now? What's going to be the good things they should be looking at versus the bad things in terms of the philosophical positioning of their money? How do they invest today, MJ? What do they do?
There's a couple of thoughts there. The first is, the old cliche phrase, if it happens once, shame on you. If it happens twice, shame on me. This is a good reminder of just how volatile the stock market can be in times of uncertainty. And it's always been that way, right? So investors that are to the age of distribution, the age where they need to be more conservative and they need to be focusing on income, I think it's a perfect opportunity to take winnings off the table. What are you going to do with those winnings? Well, I think that this gives you an opportunity for true diversification. Number one, start being able to work with a fiduciary who knows fixed income to make your principal safer and get it to produce 2 to 3 times the income that it has under common stock and mutual funds. Number two, really look for some of those good quality common stocks that are paying a higher than average dividend, and make certain that someone's really doing the analysis and that they're fundamentally sound companies.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think there's a huge emphasis today in opportunities if folks can afford to in the value stock realm, where we've got good dividends, stocks that are still underpriced based on that correction are going to still come back. And if COVID ends up being a 2020 event and not a 2021 event, those stocks will appreciate when that happens and we transition out of this.
It's interesting. I want to ask you, Matthew, we know that you can have a very healthy, robust, value-based, dividend-oriented stock portfolio that might pay a 4 or 5% dividend. But yet it seems like we never see that. It seems like most of the stock portfolios we see that traditional advisors utilize, or mutual fund portfolios, maybe pay a 2.5% dividend, and that's it. Why do you think we don't see it more? Is it just because, like we talked about on today's show, it's more difficult to invest in value-oriented, high dividend strategies than it is just to ride growth and momentum upward?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the business model, right? So when you're working with a franchise, let's say, or you're dealing with a traditional brokerage, wholesaler, something of that nature, most of those brokers are only going to be pushing or suggesting the types of positions that their firm has realized to be on the safe side or to be on the popular side. It takes a great deal of due diligence. You know this as well as I do, Dave. When you're in fixed income or you're looking for value stocks that have good dividends, it takes a lot of good old-fashioned elbow grease. And the time, the energy, that's all money.
I think it's perhaps why I love coming to visit you so much in Iowa, because farmers aren't afraid of hard work. But unfortunately, I think today's generation of financial advisors often is taking the easy way out with ETFs and mutual funds and so on. So 15 seconds. Final words of wisdom for our income generation members.
Do not forget to learn lessons from the lessons learned of previous generations and what's happening around us today. This is not pie in the sky. This is not just random, whatever happens, happens. What happens to your money is a direct result of the decisions that you make. And there may be some really good alternatives to be able to explore with your money that will give you a greater chance of success in retirement.
And history repeats itself for a reason. Matthew, it's been our pleasure as usual. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Dave.
And you stay with us too. We'll be back here with more in a moment on the income generation. We'll be right back.